Victoria Harrington slammed her open palm against the hood of a $2 million Ferrari and screamed at a room full of the most expensive mechanics in America. 5 years, and not one of you can make it start. Then she saw the janitor by the door, a single dad named Daniel Carter, mop still in his hand, and pointed a shaking finger straight at him. "You, don't touch it. Don't you dare." But Daniel didn't move. He just looked at that dead engine and said something that turned the whole garage to ice. What he knew about that car and about her dead father will break your heart before this story ends. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe the world overlooks good men every single day, subscribe and stay with me to the end. The garage smelled like money and defeat. Marcus Bell wiped his hands on a rag that cost more than most men's shirts and turned to face the woman who signed his checks. He was the kind of man who had never once in 30 years admitted he was wrong. He wasn't about to start now. "Miss Harrington," Marcus said, "I've brought in the best. Turin, Stuttgart, Modena. I flew a man in from Maranello who worked on the actual assembly line in 1987, and I'm telling you what all of them told me. There is nothing wrong with this car." Victoria stood very still. When she was angry, she did not raise her voice. That was the thing people misunderstood about her. The louder problem was the quiet one. "Then start it," she said. "You know I can't." "Then something is wrong with it, Marcus." "Physically, no. Every system checks out. Compression, spark, fuel delivery, ignition. The ECU. There's no ECU. It's carbureted, but you understand my meaning. There is no fault. The car simply will not turn over." He spread his hands. "At some point, a machine is just a machine. It doesn't owe us anything." "That machine," Victoria said, and now the quiet in her voice had a blade in it, "was the last thing my father ever touched with his own 2 hands. So no, it is not just a machine, and you will not stand in my garage and talk to me like it is." Marcus had the decency to look at the floor. Around them, 4 other men shifted their weight. They were consultants, specialists. Between them, they held enough diplomas to wallpaper the room and enough billing hours that Victoria could have bought a small vineyard for what they'd cost her over the past 18 months. Not one of them said a word. 5 years, Victoria said. She said it the way other people say a prayer or a curse. "I have poured 5 years, and I don't even want to say the number out loud into that car. And the best men in the world keep telling me the same thing. It's perfect. It's flawless. It just won't run." She laughed, and there was no humor anywhere in it. "Do you understand how insane that sounds? Do you? A flawless car that doesn't work? Ms. Harrington, get out." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry. All of you, get out. Send me your invoices. I'll pay them because I always pay, and then I never want to see any of your faces in this building again." She turned away from them toward the car. "Go." They went. Slowly, with the wounded dignity of expensive men being dismissed, but they went. Their footsteps echoed up the ramp. Car doors opened and closed out in the drive engines that started on the first try, purred away into the California afternoon. And then it was quiet. Victoria Harrington, 39 years old, worth more money than she would ever spend, feared in 3 time zones, stood alone in a marble garage with a car that would not start, and she pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes so she would not cry in front of a machine. Except she was not alone. There was a man by the far door. He'd been there the whole time. He came every morning at 6. He emptied the bins, wiped down the glass, swept the floor, checked the lights, and left before most of the staff arrived. He was so quiet, so unremarkable, so completely part of the background, that in 18 months, Victoria had never once learned his name. To her, he was simply the man who kept things clean. Furniture with a pulse. I was standing near the Ferrari now, and he was looking at it, and there was something in the way he was looking at it that made Victoria lower her hands. He wasn't looking at it the way you look at a beautiful thing. Every visitor to this garage looked at the car that way, with hunger, with envy, with the particular greed rich men have for objects they cannot have. This man was looking at it the way a doctor looks at a patient. "Can I help you?" Victoria said. It was not a question. It was a door being closed. The man Daniel, though she didn't know that yet, turned to her. He was maybe 42. Tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His uniform was clean but old, the knees worn pale. He had a mop in one hand and a look on his face like a man who had just remembered something he'd spent years trying to forget. "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm sorry. I'll finish up over here." He turned to go. And Victoria, for reasons she could not have explained, if you'd offered her $1 billion to do it, said, "Wait." He stopped. "You were listening," she said. "I was working, ma'am. I didn't mean to." "You were listening. To all of it. To Marcus." She walked toward him slowly, studying his face the way she studied men across boardroom tables, looking for the tell, the flinch, the tiny crack where the truth lived. "You had a look on your face just now." "I don't know what you mean." "You do." She stopped a few feet from him. "When Marcus said the car was flawless, you had a look, like you thought he was a fool." The man was quiet for a long moment. "It's not my place, ma'am. I'm making it your place." What did that look mean? And here is where a smart man, a man who wanted to keep his easy, invisible, uncomplicated little job, would have said nothing. Would have apologized again, put his head down, and pushed his mop out the door. Daniel Carter knew that. He'd spent 3 years learning to say nothing. Nothing had kept him and his daughter fed. Nothing had kept him safe. But he looked at that car, and he looked at that woman standing there with the ghost of 5 years of grief on her face, and something in him that he'd buried a long time ago pushed its way up through the dirt. "He's not a fool," Daniel said quietly. "He's just looking in the wrong place." Victoria's whole body went still. "Say that again." "They're all looking for something that's broken," Daniel said. He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at the car, and his voice had changed lower, surer, like a man reading from a book only he could see. "That's the mistake. They walk in, they assume something failed, and they spend all their time hunting for the failure. And they can't find it. And it drives them out of their minds, because they're the best in the world, and they can't find the thing that's wrong." He shook his head slowly. "Because there isn't one." Marcus said the same thing, that there's nothing wrong with it. "No." Daniel finally looked at her. "Marcus said there's nothing wrong with it, and he meant it like a defeat. Like the car beat him. I'm telling you there's nothing wrong with it, and I mean it like an answer." The silence in that garage was total. "I don't understand," Victoria said, and it cost her something to admit it, because Victoria Harrington did not say those words to anyone, and had certainly never said them to the man who cleaned her floors. "That car isn't sick, ma'am." Daniel set his mop against the wall gently, the way you'd set down something that mattered. "It's locked." 20 minutes later, they were sitting on 2 folding chairs, and Victoria had sent her assistant away twice, and Marcus Bell had been called and told to turn his car around and come back. And Marcus was now standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and a look on his face like he'd swallowed something sour. "You're seriously going to listen to the custodian," Marcus said. "I'm going to listen to whoever tells me something I haven't heard for 5 years, Victoria said without turning around. "Which right now is not you." Marcus's jaw worked. "Ms. Harrington, with respect. I don't know what this man told you, but I have flown in. I know who you flew in. I paid for the flights." She turned to Daniel. "Say it again, for him, what you told me." Daniel looked uncomfortable. It's one thing to speak the truth to a grieving woman in an empty room. It's another to say it in front of a man who wants you gone. "I said it's not broken," Daniel said. "I said it's locked." Marcus snorted. "It's a 1987 Ferrari. It doesn't have a security system. There's no immobilizer, no transponder, no its carburetors and points and a distributor. There's nothing on that car that can lock it." "Nothing that came from the factory," Daniel agreed. That stopped Marcus. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel stood up. He walked to the car, and he crouched down beside the front wheel, and he pointed at something underneath, back toward the firewall. "Come look," he said. Marcus didn't move. "Marcus," Victoria said. Marcus came and looked. He crouched next to a man in a janitor's uniform, and he peered up into the dark underbelly of a car he'd been paid a fortune to fix, at a spot he had apparently never once bothered to examine. Because why would you look there? There was nothing there. There was nothing wrong with the car. That bracket, Daniel said. See it? It's a bracket. It's a bracket that isn't in any Ferrari manual ever printed. It's not factory. Somebody made that, by hand, and bolted it in. Daniel's voice was patient, almost gentle. You can tell by the welds. Factory welds on a car like this are done a certain way. That's not it. That's a man in a workshop doing careful work, hiding something where nobody would think to look, because nobody looks under a car for the reason it won't start. They look at the engine, they look at the fuel, they look at the spark. He paused. Nobody looks here. Marcus stared at the bracket for a long time. What is it? He finally said, and his voice had lost some of its edge. I don't know yet. Daniel stood brushing off his knees. I've got a theory, but I'd need to open it up to be sure, and I'm not going to touch this woman's car without her permission. He looked at Victoria. Because whatever's inside there, whoever built it on purpose. And people don't hide things inside a machine for no reason. Victoria felt something cold move down her spine. My father, she said slowly, restored this car, himself, before I was born. Daniel went very still. How was an engineer? She went on, and she didn't know why she was telling him this stranger, but the words were coming and she couldn't stop them. Not by trade, by love. He built rockets for a living, but on weekends he built engines. And this car, he found it in pieces in a barn in Nevada. Took him 9 years to restore it. He used to say it was the only thing he ever made that talked back to him. Her voice caught. He gave it to me when he died. It ran then. It ran at the funeral. My driver brought it here, and it ran the whole way. And then 2 weeks later, it stopped, and it has never started since. And I have spent 5 years and every resource I have trying to make it run again, because it was the last thing he touched, and I will not let it die too. The garage was silent. Even Marcus was silent. Ma'am, Daniel said quietly, what was your father's name? She looked at him surprised by the question. Robert Harrington. Why? Something crossed Daniel's face. Something that was there and gone too fast to read. No reason, he said. But it was not no reason. Victoria had built a career on knowing when a man was lying to her, and this man had just lied, and she filed it away because she was going to need it later. Can you fix it? She said. I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got. Daniel looked at the car. I think I can figure out what your father did. I think I might even understand why he did it. But I've been wrong before, and I've watched better men than me be wrong about this exact car for 5 years, and I'm not going to stand here and make you a promise I can't keep. You've had enough of those. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. How long would you need? 48 hours. Marcus made a noise. 48, Ms. Harrington. I've had this car for a year and a half. And you told me an hour ago there was nothing more to be done. Victoria didn't even look at him. She was looking at Daniel. 48 hours. 48 hours, Daniel said. And if I fail, if I open it up and I'm wrong and I can't make it run, you owe me nothing. Not a dollar. I'll clean up after myself and put your car back exactly the way it was, and you'll never see me again. But I need one thing. Name it. Nobody else touches it. Just me. No consultants. No experts flying in. No one standing over my shoulder telling me I'm doing it wrong. He glanced at Marcus. Because I'm going to do this the slow way, the old way. And it's going to look like I'm wasting time, and it's going to make everybody in this building crazy, and I need you to trust that I'm not. Victoria studied him. Why? She said. Why do you care? It's my father's car. It's my grief. You could push your mop out that door right now and go home and never think about any of us again. So why are you standing here offering me 48 hours of your life? And Daniel Carter, who had spent 3 years being invisible on purpose, who had a little girl at home, who needed a father, more than the world needed a hero, looked at that dead machine and then at the grieving woman and gave her an answer that was more true than he meant it to be. Because I know what it's like, he said, to lose the thing you built, and to have everybody tell you it's gone, and to know in your gut they're wrong. and to have no one, not one single person willing to just listen long enough to find out. Victoria's eyes filled. "Marcus," she said without breaking her gaze from Daniel. "Go home." "Ms. Harrington." "Go home, Marcus." He went. But at the door he stopped, and he turned, and he looked at Daniel with pure contempt. "When this falls apart," Marcus said, "and it will, when the janitor pulls that car apart and can't put it back together. Remember? I've got 30 years and half the world's greatest engineers on record saying that car can't be fixed. And you've got a mop." He pointed a finger. 2 days. Then I want to hear you say I was right." He left. Daniel didn't rise to it. He just watched Marcus go, and then he turned back to the car, and something in his face changed. Loosened. Opened, came alive, like a man taking off a mask he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it wasn't his face. "He's going to be a problem," Victoria said. "Men like that always are," Daniel said. "But he's not wrong about one thing." "What's that?" Daniel looked at her. "If I fail," he said quietly, "I fail in front of everyone. And you don't just lose a car, you lose the last piece of proof that your father was right about it." He set his jaw. "So I'd better not fail." That night, Daniel didn't go home right away. He called his sister first, the way he always did when a shift ran late, and he heard his daughter's voice in the background, and it did to his heart what it always did. "Daddy." Lily's voice, small and clear. "Are you coming home?" "Late tonight, sweetheart. Aunt Karen's going to give you dinner. You said we'd read the dragon book. We will, I promise. I'll read it to you when I get home, even if you're asleep. I'll read it to your dreams." He closed his eyes, standing in that garage holding the phone. "Did you have a good day?" "Marcus at school pushed me." Daniel almost laughed at the name. "Yeah. Well, some Marcuses just do that, baby. What did you do?" "I told the teacher, and then I ignored him because you said ignoring is stronger than pushing back." "That's my girl." "When are you coming home?" "Soon. I love you to the moon." "I love you past it," she said, which was their thing, and then she was gone, and Daniel was alone with a $2 million machine and a name he hadn't heard in years. Robert Harrington. He knew that name. Of course he knew that name. He walked to the car, and he crouched down, and he ran his fingers along the underside of it, along that hand-welded bracket, and he closed his eyes, and he was somewhere else. I was 26 years old in a workshop that smelled of oil and solder, and an old man with steady hands was showing him how to weld a bracket that no manual would ever mention. "Why hide it?" young Daniel had asked. "If the mechanism's so clever, why not put it where people can see how smart you were?" And the old man, Silas, his teacher, the greatest restoration engineer of his generation, and the only man who ever treated Daniel like a son, had laughed and said, "Because it's not for people, boy. It's for one person, the right one. And when the right one comes along, they'll know where to look. Everybody else can go on thinking the car is broken. That's not a bug. That's the whole point." "Whose car is this anyway?" "A friend of mine, a rocket man. Wanted a way to lock it that no thief on earth could ever crack because you can't steal what you don't understand." Silas had wiped his hands. He wanted to build a secret into the machine, a little test. Anyone who could pass it, anyone who understood the car the way he understood it could start it. Everyone else, they'd think it was dead. He'd looked at young Daniel with those pale, kind eyes. "You know what he told me? He said one day I'm going to give this car to my little girl, and I don't want her to have a car. Any fool can have a car. I want her to have to earn it. I want her to learn it. So she remembers every time she drives it that some things are worth understanding." Daniel crouched in the dark on the floor of a Silicon Valley garage. 20 years later, opened his eyes, and there were tears in them. "Robert Harrington," he whispered, "you son of a gun, you actually did it." Because now he understood. Now the whole thing fell into place with a click he felt in his chest. Robert Harrington had never meant for his daughter to send this car to a garage. He'd never meant for a parade of experts to open the hood and stare at a perfect engine and lose their minds. He'd meant for her to sit in it, to feel it, to learn it, to do the sequence, whatever the sequence was, that only someone who truly loved the machine would ever bother to learn. He'd built her a lock that could only be opened by understanding, and his daughter, drowning in grief, had done the one thing that would keep it locked forever. She'd handed it to strangers. Daniel stood up slowly. He looked at the car for a long, long time. And then he did something none of the experts had done in 5 years. He didn't open the hood. He didn't run a diagnostic. He didn't reach for a single tool. He opened the driver's door, and he sat down inside the car, and he put both hands on the wheel, and he sat there in the dark and the silence, and he listened. Not with his ears, with everything Silas had ever taught him. "Okay, old man," he murmured, though he didn't know if he meant Silas or Robert, or maybe both. "Show me what you did." Upstairs in a house, too big for one person. Victoria Harrington stood at a window and looked down at the glow of the garage light, the only light on in the whole estate at midnight, and she watched on the security feed on her tablet, a man in a janitor's uniform sitting motionless behind the wheel of her father's Ferrari. He wasn't doing anything. That was what undid her. Every expert she'd ever hired had done something. They'd swarmed the car. They'd pulled it apart. They'd filled the garage with tools and noise and confidence and invoices. They had done so much, and none of it had worked. This man was doing nothing. He was just sitting there. For an hour now. Just sitting, and every so often touching something, the wheel, the shifter, a knob on the dash, slowly, thoughtfully, like a man reading a face he was trying to remember. And Victoria, who trusted no one, who had learned young and learned hard that the world takes what it can from you and calls it business, found herself doing something she hadn't done since the funeral. She was hoping. She hated how much it hurt. She'd sworn to herself somewhere in year 3 that she was done hoping about the car, that she'd keep paying for the experts out of stubbornness and loyalty and love, but that she wouldn't let herself believe anymore, because believing and then watching another man walk away, shaking his head, was a small death she couldn't keep dying. And now, here was a janitor, a stranger, a man whose name she'd had to ask her head of security to look up an hour ago. Daniel Carter, 42, widower, one daughter, 8. Address in a part of the city she'd never driven through. Employment history that stopped oddly 3 years ago. Before that, nothing. A blank. Like the man hadn't existed at all before he showed up to clean her floors. She'd asked security to dig deeper. They'd come back an hour later, and what they'd found made her stand at this window now with her heart in her throat. Because before the blank, before the 3 years of nothing, Daniel Carter had a different life. A big one. A name in a small, rarefied world. And then something had happened, something ugly and buried, and the man had simply vanished, walked away from everything, became a ghost with a mop. Her security chief had said one sentence that stuck in her like a hook. "Ms. Harrington, according to the industry people I called, this guy wasn't just good. Before it all fell apart, one man in the field called him the most gifted restoration engineer of his generation. Trained by a legend. Apparently he could, and I'm quoting, hear what a machine was trying to say." Victoria had thanked him and hung up and stood at this window. Now she watched Daniel Carter sit in her father's car in the dark, and she whispered to the glass, "Who are you?" And down in the garage, as if he'd heard her, though he couldn't have, though it was impossible. Daniel Carter's hands stopped moving on the wheel. He'd found something. She saw it in the way his whole body changed. She saw the janitor straighten. She saw a man come back to life. She saw him lean forward slowly and reach for something low on the dash, something she'd never noticed in her whole life. A small, unremarkable control she would have sworn did nothing. And she saw his lips move. The audio on the feed was bad, muffled. But her whole life, she'd been good at reading faces, reading lips, reading the true thing under the said thing. And she watched Daniel Carter's mouth in the grainy dark, and she was almost sure, almost certain, that what the janitor said alone in her father's car at midnight was 2 words. "Hello, Robert." Victoria's tablet slipped in her hand. She set it down on the windowsill. Her heart was going too fast. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was tired, that she was tired, that a man talking to a car at midnight was just a man talking to a car. But she couldn't shake it. Because when Daniel had asked her father's name that afternoon, he'd lied about not knowing it. She was sure of that now. And a man doesn't lie about a stranger's name. He only lies about a name he already knows. She picked her tablet back up. On the screen, Daniel had climbed out of the car. He was standing beside it, and he had a notebook out, an actual paper notebook, the kind nobody used anymore, and he was writing in it, fast page after page, stopping only to look at the car, to nod, to write more. Whatever he'd found a lot of it. And then he did the last thing she expected. He stopped. He put the notebook away. He looked up directly, it seemed, into the camera, though there was no way he could have known which one, and he said something to it, to her, to whoever was watching. And this time the muffled audio caught just enough, just barely enough, that Victoria heard it through the tinny little speaker at midnight in her empty house. "You should come down here, Ms. Harrington." Daniel's voice quiet and certain. "In the morning. Bring nothing. There's something in this car you need to see, and it isn't a part." A pause. "It's a message. And it's been waiting 5 years for you to be ready to hear it." Then he picked up his mop, because even now, even after everything, he was still just a man who cleaned floors and had a little girl at home waiting for a dragon book. And he turned off the garage light, and the feed went dark, and Victoria Harrington stood alone in her enormous house, holding a tablet, showing nothing. Her father's voice in her memory saying, "A machine remembers the hands that cared for it." And for the first time in 5 years, she let herself believe that tomorrow, everything might change. She did not sleep. She sat by the window until the sky went gray, watching the dark shape of the garage, waiting for morning, waiting to go down and meet a man she'd looked past 1,000 times, the man everyone else refused to see. Victoria Harrington was standing at the garage door at 5:59 in the morning, 1 minute before Daniel Carter's shift began, holding 2 cups of coffee she'd made herself in a kitchen she rarely used, and she felt like a fool. She didn't know how he took it. That was the thing that had undone her at the counter, standing there in the dark before dawn. She didn't know if the man who cleaned her floors took cream or sugar, or drank it black like the burnt truth. She'd employed him for 18 months, and she didn't know a single thing about him except what her security chief had told her at midnight, and that had only made the not knowing worse. So she'd made one black and one with cream, and now she stood there holding both like an idiot, waiting. He came up the drive on foot. No car. She hadn't known that either. A man who could allegedly hear what a machine was trying to say, and he took the bus to work. He stopped when he saw her, just for a second. Then he kept walking. "You didn't have to wait for me," he said. "You told me to come down in the morning. I did." He reached the door. He looked at the 2 cups in her hands. "One of those for me." "I didn't know how you—" She stopped, started over. Black or cream? Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, near one. Black. She handed him the black one. Kept the cream for herself, even though she took hers black too, because she wasn't going to explain that. "Thank you," Daniel said. And he meant it, and it was such a small thing, a cup of coffee, but she watched him hold it in both hands, the way a man holds something he isn't used to being given, and she understood suddenly and completely that no one had made this man a cup of coffee in a very long time. "Show me," she said, because she couldn't stand the feeling in her chest. "You said there's something in the car. Show me." "It's not going anywhere. You should drink your coffee first." "I've had 4 cups. I've been up all night. Show me." He studied her face, saw the sleepless truth in it, nodded. "All right." They walked to the car together, and it struck Victoria that she'd walked to this car 1,000 times in 5 years, always with a stranger beside her, always with dread coiled in her stomach, and this was the first time she'd walked to it without wanting to cry. Daniel set his coffee down on the workbench. He picked up his paper notebook, the one she'd watched him fill at midnight, and he opened it, and then he did something strange. He closed it again. "I'm going to tell you what I found," he said. "But I need you to understand something first, or none of it's going to make sense." "Then tell me." "Your father didn't build a lock to keep thieves out." Victoria frowned. "You said last night." "I said the car was locked, and it is. But I've been thinking about it all night, and I had it wrong." He set the notebook down. "A lock keeps things out. That's not what this is." He looked at her. "This is a door, and it was built to let one person in." The garage was very quiet. "Me," Victoria said. "You." She felt her throat close. How do you know that? Because of where he hid it, and how he hid it, and what it takes to open it. Daniel crouched down beside the car, and he beckoned her and Victoria Harrington in a suit that cost more than most cars got down on the floor of her own garage next to the janitor and looked where he pointed. You remember that bracket, Daniel said. The one that's not on any Ferrari ever built. I remember. It's a housing. It holds a mechanism, and the mechanism is beautiful, and I mean that as a craftsman, I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen work this clean. His voice had that quality again, the low certain music she'd heard last night on the feed. It's mechanical, no electronics. Nothing a computer could ever find because there's nothing electronic to find. It's cams and springs and linkages, and it's tied into three things in the car. The ignition, the shifter, and this. He reached up under the dash and touched the small, unremarkable control she'd noticed him find at midnight, the one she'd have sworn did nothing. What is that? She asked. I don't know what he called it. There's no name for it because it doesn't exist on any other car in the world. He made it. Daniel's fingers rested on it lightly. It looks like it does nothing. That's on purpose. Every mechanic who ever sat in this car saw this and dismissed it because it doesn't connect to anything they understand. But it connects to everything. It's the key. Except it's not a key you turn. It's a key you know. Victoria stared at the little control. For 5 years, she said slowly. The answer was sitting under the dashboard, where any of them could have touched it. Where all of them did touch it probably, and moved right past it. Because they were looking for something wrong. Daniel stood and offered her his hand, and she took it and let him pull her up, and neither of them acknowledged that she'd just let the janitor help her off the floor. That's the genius of it. He didn't hide the answer somewhere hard to reach. He hid it in plain sight, and he protected it with the one thing money can't buy and expertise can't fake. Which is what? Daniel looked at her, caring enough to understand it. Victoria had to turn away for a moment. She walked a few steps toward the workbench, and she picked up her coffee she didn't want, and she held it, and she breathed. You keep saying that, she said without turning around. Understanding, caring, like it's a real thing. Like it's a tool you can pick up. She turned back. But you can't tell me a man built a lock that only opens for love. That's not engineering. That's a fairy tale. You're right, Daniel said. She blinked. She hadn't expected that. It's not love, he went on. It's knowledge. But here's the thing your father understood, and it took me half the night to see it. The only people who'd ever bother to learn this car this deeply are the people who love it. He didn't build a lock that opens for love. He built a lock that opens for knowledge, and then he trusted that only love would ever go to the trouble of getting the knowledge. Daniel picked his own coffee back up. That's not a fairy tale, Ms. Harrington. That's the smartest thing I've ever seen a man do to a machine. Victoria was quiet for a long time. There's a sequence, she finally said. It wasn't a question. Isn't there? A thing you have to do in order to open the door. Yes. Do you know it? And here Daniel hesitated, and Victoria caught it the same hesitation she'd caught yesterday when she'd said her father's name. I know most of it, Daniel said carefully. I worked it out last night. The bracket, the linkages, the way the cams engage, it's like reading a sentence when you know the language. I can see what he built. I can see what it wants. He set the coffee down again. But there's a piece I don't have. And I don't think I'm supposed to have it. I think it's the piece that's yours. What does that mean? It means, Daniel said slowly, that I can walk you right up to the door. I can show you the lock, and I can show you how it works, and I can even do most of the sequence myself. But there's a last step, and it's not mechanical. It's a thing your father would have told you or shown you or... He stopped. Did he ever teach you anything about this car? Anything. Even something that seemed like nothing at the time. Victoria opened her mouth to say no. And then she didn't. Because a memory came up out of 5 years of grief, like a body rising in dark water, and it hit her so hard she had to grab the edge of the workbench. Ms. Harrington. He used to... Her voice cracked. She started again. When I was little. He used to let me sit in it, in the garage back home, the old garage before all of this. He'd put me on his lap behind the wheel, and he'd say... She stopped. pressed her hand to her mouth. He'd say you have to say hello before she'll talk to you. And I'd say hello to the car, like a kid. And he'd laugh. Her eyes were streaming now, and she didn't wipe them. I thought it was a game. I thought he was just being my dad. Being silly. I never... Victoria. It was the first time he'd used her name. Neither of them noticed. What did he... When you said hello, what did he do with his hands? I don't... She squeezed her eyes shut. There was a thing. He'd have me touch something, and he'd say hello, and I'd put my hand on... Her eyes flew open. The little switch. Under the dash. The one you found. He'd put my hand on it, and he'd say, now say hello, and I'd say hello, Bella, because that's what he called the car, Bella, and he'd... She was shaking. He'd move the shifter, and turn the key, in some order, and it would start and he'd say, see, she said hello back. The garage was so silent, Victoria could hear her own heartbeat. Daniel had gone completely still. Bella, he said quietly. That was her name. He named her Bella. Victoria wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing everything, not caring. I forgot. I forgot completely. How do you forget something like that? How do you forget your own father putting your hand on a... Her voice broke apart. For 5 years I've been paying strangers to tear her apart, and I forgot that all I had to do was say hello. And then Victoria Harrington, feared in 3 time zones, put her hand over her eyes and sobbed, standing in her garage at 6:15 in the morning, next to a man who cleaned her floors, and Daniel Carter did the only thing he knew how to do, which was to stand there quietly and let her, because he'd learned 3 years ago that grief doesn't want to be fixed, it just wants to not be alone. When she could speak again, she said, you knew, didn't you? You already knew about the hello. That's why you were sitting in the car last night. That's why you... She looked up at him, and her wet eyes went sharp, the businesswoman surfacing even through the tears. I watched you on the security feed. You sat in that car for an hour. And then your lips moved, and I could have sworn you said... She stopped. You said a name. You said hello to somebody. Daniel didn't answer. Who did you say hello to, Daniel? And there it was. The question under the question. She'd been circling it since yesterday afternoon, since he'd lied about her father's name, and now she'd walked all the way up to it and put it on the table between them. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the car. He looked at his hands. And when he spoke, his voice had changed, gone somewhere far away. I need to tell you something, he said. And when I'm done, you're going to want to check every word of it, and you should, and I'll give you the names to check it with. But I need you to hear all of it before you decide what it means. Victoria set down her coffee. She folded her arms. Go on. Your father didn't build this lock alone. Daniel looked at her. He couldn't have. He was a brilliant man, a rocket engineer, you said, and it shows the mechanism has that kind of mind all over it. But he wasn't a restoration man. He didn't have the hands for work this fine. Nobody's born with those hands. You have to be taught them over years by somebody who's got them already. He took a breath. There was one man in this country who could have built that mechanism with your father. 1. His name was Silas Vance, and he was the best that ever lived. And he's been gone 6 years now, and I know that he built it because I was there when he was talking about it. Victoria's arms came uncrossed. You were there. I was 26 years old. And Silas Vance was my teacher. Daniel's throat worked. He took me in when I was nothing. When I was a dumb kid with grease under my nails and no father of my own, and more anger than sense. He taught me everything. Not just how to fix a machine, how to hear one. He used to say, anybody can learn what's broken, but it takes a lifetime to learn what a machine is trying to tell you. He looked at Victoria. And one afternoon in his workshop, he was welding a bracket for a rocket man's Ferrari. And I asked him why he was hiding the mechanism. And he told me it was a lock that only opened for understanding, built for a man who wanted his daughter to earn the car, instead of just having it. Daniel's voice dropped. I was in the room, Victoria, 20 years ago, when your father's lock was born. Victoria had to sit down. She pulled the folding chair over, and she sat, and she stared at Daniel Carter, and the whole world had gone strange and small. That's not possible, she said. You can check it. Silas kept records. Silas kept everything. There's a workshop journal, and if his estate still has it, and I think they do, there'll be an entry about a bracket for a Mr. Harrington's Ferrari, and it'll have my initials on it, because I was his apprentice, and I logged half his jobs. Daniel spread his hands. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm telling you to check. But it's true. Of all the janitors in all the garages in the world, the one who ended up cleaning your floor was the one who watched your father's secret get made. That doesn't happen, Victoria whispered. That's not how the world works. That's coincidence. Like that doesn't... I don't think it's coincidence, Daniel said quietly. Then what is it? He was silent for a moment. I think, he said, that some things wait. I think a machine can hold a message for 20 years and just wait. For the right person to walk in the door. And I think your father and my teacher built something so good, so patient, that it just sat here in the dark, being called broken by fools for 5 years until the one man who happened to know what it was pushed a mop through that door. He shook his head slowly. Call it coincidence if you want. I've decided to call it something else. What? A gift. Daniel looked at the car. From two dead men who loved their work. To their kids. Victoria wept again quietly this time, and Daniel let her. And outside the garage, the California morning came up gold and indifferent over an estate where a billionaire and a janitor sat together in the presence of something neither of them could fully explain. It was 6:40 in the morning, and then, because the world does not stop for grief, and because Marcus Bell had spent a sleepless night of his own, gnawing on his humiliation. A car came up the drive too fast, and gravel sprayed, and a door slammed, and a voice that had been calm and expensive yesterday came into the garage hot and ragged. Where is it? Victoria stood wiping her face fast, the CEO armor slamming back down over the grieving daughter in half a second. Marcus, it's not even 7. Where is my car? Marcus came down the ramp, and his eyes went straight to the Ferrari, scanning it, and Victoria realized he was checking for damage. Checking whether the janitor had done something to it in the night. You let him touch it. You let him work on it alone all night, no supervision. Do you have any idea what that car is worth? Do you have any idea what he could have? I didn't touch anything under the hood, Daniel said evenly. You can check. Nothing's been opened. Nothing's been removed. I'm not talking to you. Marcus didn't even look at him. He came right up to the car and started running his hands over it, the fenders, the hood latch, checking. I'm talking to my client. Ms. Harrington, I have represented the finest names in automotive restoration for 30 years, and I am telling you that letting an unvetted and unqualified... His hand hit the hood latch and he yanked it, popping the hood. An unlicensed person, work unsupervised on a $2 million... Don't, Daniel said. Something in his voice stopped Marcus's hand halfway to the propped hood. Excuse me. Don't lift it all the way. The prop's original and the pivot's fatigued. If you slam it up, it'll bend, and then you've damaged the one thing I'm trying to preserve. Daniel walked over unhurried and eased the hood up the last few inches himself, gently, and set it. There. Now look all you want. Nothing's been touched. Marcus looked into the engine bay. And it was of course perfect. Exactly as he'd left it. Exactly as it had been for 5 years. See? Daniel said quietly. That's the whole problem, isn't it? It's always perfect. You've been staring at a perfect engine for 1.5 years wondering why it won't run, and the answer was never in there. He nodded at the engine. It was never going to be in there. You were reading the wrong page. Marcus straightened up slowly. His face had gone a dangerous color. You think you're very clever, he said. No, Daniel said. I think you're very good at what you do, and this just isn't what you do. There's no shame in that. I couldn't do your job. I couldn't fly to Modena and charm a collector and authenticate a chassis number and negotiate a sale. You could do all that in your sleep. But this, he touched the car lightly. This isn't a sale. It's a conversation. And nobody taught you the language. And somebody taught you, Marcus sneered. Yes, Daniel said simply. Somebody did. Marcus turned to Victoria. Ms. Harrington, I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going to let you make your decision, and I'll respect it whatever it is. but I'd be failing you if I didn't say it." He drew himself up. This man appeared out of nowhere. He has no verifiable history in this industry. I checked last night. I made calls. There is no Daniel Carter registered with any restoration guild or association or shop in the country. He materialized 3 years ago out of thin air. And now he's spun you a story. I don't know what he told you, but I can see on your face that he told you something, and he's got you believing that the janitor is secretly a genius. Marcus's voice softened, and that was worse because it went kind, went reasonable, went concerned. "Victoria, you are grieving. You have been grieving for 5 years, and grieving people want to believe in miracles, and men who want things from grieving people know exactly how to sell one. I've watched it happen to good families my whole career. Please, don't be the mark." And it landed. Victoria felt it land, because it was aimed exactly where she was softest, at the small, cold voice in the back of her own head that had said all morning, "This doesn't happen. Coincidence like this doesn't happen. That's not how the world works." She looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at her, and he didn't argue, and he didn't panic, and he didn't do any of the things a con man would do. He just waited. Like he'd waited by the door yesterday. Like he'd waited in the car all night. Like a man who'd learned that the truth doesn't need you to rush it. "He's right," Daniel said. Marcus blinked. Victoria blinked. "About some of it," Daniel went on. "You should be suspicious of me. A stranger shows up with a story that's too perfect. Your dead father, my dead teacher, a secret in the car. And gosh, wouldn't you know it? I'm the only one who can unlock it. If I were you, I wouldn't believe a word." He looked at Marcus. "And you're right that there's no record of me. I made sure of that. 3 years ago, I took my name out of every registry, every association, every shop directory in the country on purpose, because I needed to disappear, and I had my reasons, and they're mine." He looked back at Victoria. "So Marcus is right to warn you. He's doing his job, and he's doing it well, and if you throw me out right now, I won't blame you, and I won't fight it. I'll put your hood down, and I'll go home." Nobody spoke. But Daniel said, "Before you decide, I'm going to make it easy for you, because I don't want you to trust me. Trust is what con men ask for. I don't want your trust. I want your verification." He picked up his paper notebook, tore out a page, and wrote on it fast, and held it out to Victoria. "That's the name of Silas Vance's estate attorney. That's the location of his workshop journals, or where they were 6 years ago. And that's the name of 2 men still alive in this industry who apprenticed alongside me and will confirm every word I've said about who I used to be if you can get them to talk, which won't be easy because the thing that happened to me scared a lot of people quiet." He set the page in her hand. "Check all of it. Take a week. Take a month. The car's not going anywhere. I'm not asking you to believe me today." Victoria looked down at the page. "But," Daniel said, and now his voice changed. And for the first time all morning, there was something in it that wasn't calm, something that had been held down a long time and was pushing up. "There's one thing I can't prove with a phone call. One thing you'll have to decide for yourself." He looked at her. "The lock's already half open. I did the mechanical part last night. Everything Silas built I've reset and aligned, it's ready. There's one step left and it's not mine to do. It's yours. It's the hello." His jaw tightened. "So here's your choice, Victoria. You can throw me out right now and go check every name on that paper and take all the time you need to be sure I'm not a con man, and you should. And in a month when you know I was telling the truth, you can call me back and I'll come finish it. That's the safe way. That's the smart way. Marcus would tell you to take it." "And the other way," Victoria said. Her voice was barely there. "The other way," Daniel said, "is you sit in that car right now, this morning, before you've verified anything, before you know if I'm a liar, and you put your hand where your father put it, and you say hello, and you do the sequence with me, and either the last thing your father ever built for you starts up under your hands or it doesn't." He held her eyes. "The safe way you'll know I'm honest, but you'll have done it alone in a month after the moment's gone cold. The other way you'll do it now, warm this morning, not knowing, but if it works." His voice caught just slightly. "If it works, you'll have trusted your father instead of a stranger. Because I'm not asking you to trust me, Victoria. I'm asking you to trust him. To trust that the man who put your hand on that switch when you were a little girl knew what he was doing. To bet on your father over your fear. The garage was dead silent. Marcus had gone pale. Ms. Harrington, Marcus said very quietly, if you sit in that car and it starts, it proves nothing about who this man is. It's a party trick. He could have set it up in the night. Please, verify first. There is no downside to waiting. There is one downside. Daniel said not to Marcus, to Victoria, only to Victoria. The downside is, you'll always wonder if you could have believed him without proof. Your father didn't want you to have proof, Victoria. He wanted you to have faith. That was the whole point of the lock. Marcus wants you to be a good businesswoman about it. Daniel's voice dropped to almost nothing. But your father didn't build this for a businesswoman. He built it for his little girl. Victoria Harrington stood in the middle of her garage with a torn page in one hand and 39 years of learning, never to trust anyone in the other. And she looked at the car, and she looked at the janitor, and she looked at the man who'd protected her interests for 5 years, telling her to be careful, and she felt herself standing on the edge of the exact cliff her father had built for her 20 years ago, with a dead legend's hands. Earn it, her father had said. Learn it. Don't just have it. Everybody out, she said. Marcus started forward. Victoria. Not you, Daniel. Everybody else. She didn't look away from the car. Marcus, wait upstairs. I mean it. Go. Ms. Harrington, I strongly advise. I heard your advice. It was good advice. I'm not taking it. Now she looked at him, and the tears were gone, and what was left was something Marcus had seen across negotiating tables and had learned to fear. 30 years you've served this industry, and it made you careful, and careful is exactly what you should be. But my father didn't build me a careful car. Go upstairs. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel, and whatever he saw there, it didn't reassure him. When this goes wrong, Marcus said, and it will, I want it on the record that I advised against it. It's on the record, Victoria said. Go. He went. Slowly. At the top of the ramp he stopped and looked back once, and then he was gone, and it was just the two of them again, the way it had been at midnight, the way it had been at dawn. Daniel opened the driver's door. Whenever you're ready, he said. No rush. He waited 20 years. He can wait another minute. Victoria walked to the car. She stood beside the open door, and she looked into it at the seat where her father had sat, where he'd held her on his lap and laughed and said, say hello, and her hands were shaking, and she was 40 years old and terrified like a child. What if it doesn't work, she said. What if I do it and nothing happens? What if you're wrong, or I remember it wrong, or... Her voice failed. What if the last thing my father ever built for me just sits there dead, and I have to know forever that I couldn't get him to say hello back? Daniel was quiet. Then we'll try again tomorrow, he said gently, and the day after. And I'll keep coming until we get it right, because I don't believe your father built something his own daughter couldn't open. He built it hard, Victoria. I didn't build it impossible. There's a difference, and that difference is the whole reason I know he loved you. He nodded at the seat. Sit down. Put your hand where he put it, and say hello to Bella. Victoria Harrington got into her father's car. She sat where he'd sat. She put both hands on the wheel the way she'd watched Daniel do on the security feed, and it was still warm from the morning sun, or she imagined it was, and she breathed in and under the dust, and the years she could almost smell him, the pipe tobacco and the machine oil and the man. Okay, Dad, she whispered. Daniel crouched in the open door beside her, closed his voice low and steady in her ear, like a man talking someone off a ledge or onto one. Left hand on the wheel, he said. Right hand under the dash. Find the little switch. You've got it, that's it. Feel it. Feel how it doesn't feel like it does anything. I feel it. That's the door. Now here's the sequence. I worked it out last night, and you're going to check it against what your body remembers, because your hands know this, even if your mind forgot. Shifter to neutral first. Then hold that switch. Then, and this is the part they all missed for 5 years, you don't turn the key. Not yet. His voice dropped even lower. First you say hello. Out loud. Because the last thing your father did to this mechanism, The thing Silas told me about 20 years ago. The piece I couldn't do for you. There's a delay built in. A pause. He built a pause into the sequence right here on purpose, so that whoever opened it would have to stop and wait and say the words and mean them before the car would ever start. Daniel's own eyes were wet now. He built a moment of silence into the machine Victoria, so that his daughter would have to talk to him. One more time. Victoria's hand was shaking on the switch. "Say hello," Daniel whispered. And Victoria Harrington, 39 years old, alone in her father's car, with a man who cleaned her floors, held the switch. Her father had held her hand against when she was 5 years old, and she opened her mouth, and in a voice that broke on the first sound and steadied on the last, she said the two words she had not said to that car or to her father in 5 long years of paying strangers to do it for her. "Hello, Bella." Nothing happened. Victoria sat there with her hand on the switch and her father's name for the car still hanging in the air, and the Ferrari did not move, did not breathe, did not stir, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Her face crumpled. "It didn't—" "Wait," Daniel said quietly. "That's the pause. Remember I told you." He built a pause in. "You have to wait through it. Don't turn the key yet. Just wait." So she waited. And it was the longest 10 seconds of Victoria Harrington's life, longer than any deal, any diagnosis, any deathbed. 10 seconds of holding a switch. Her father had held her hand against and saying hello to a ghost and waiting to find out if he'd built her a door or a tomb. "Now," Daniel breathed. "Shifters in neutral, hand still on the switch, turn the key, slow. Half a turn, then all the way, slow." Victoria turned the key, half a turn, and under her hand, under the dash, she felt something move. Something small and mechanical and alive. A click and a shift and a settling like a lock. She couldn't see. Finally deciding she was the one. 20 years of patience releasing all at once, and she gasped because she felt it in her palm, felt the car recognize her. "That's it," Daniel whispered. "It knows you. Now all the way." She turned the key all the way. And Bella woke up. The engine caught on the first crank. Not a struggle, not a cough, but a full-throated roar that slammed off the marble walls and filled the garage and shook the floor and went straight up through Victoria's spine and out the top of her head, and she screamed. She actually screamed, half laughing and half sobbing. Both hands flying to her mouth as the car her father built roared back to life after 5 years of silence under the hands of his daughter. "It's running!" she shrieked over the noise. "Daniel, it's running! Oh my God, it's running!" Daniel said, and he was grinning, and his own eyes were streaming, and he didn't even try to hide it. Victoria couldn't stop crying, and couldn't stop laughing, and couldn't stop listening, because it wasn't just an engine. It was exactly what her father had promised her a lifetime ago. It was a voice. It was Bella saying hello back, and somewhere underneath the roar, Victoria could hear her father laughing, the way he'd laughed when she was 5. "See?" she said hello back, and she pressed both hands to her chest like she could hold the sound inside her ribs and keep it there forever. She let it run for a full minute. 2. She didn't want to turn it off. She was afraid that if she turned it off, it would never start again, that this was a fluke, a dream, a mercy she'd wake up from. "You can shut her down," Daniel said gently. "She'll start again. She'll always start for you now. That's the whole point. Once she knows your hands, she knows them for good." Victoria turned the key back, and the engine died to silence, and the garage rang with the ghost of it, and she sat there in the sudden quiet with her whole body shaking. "Do it again," she said. "Victoria. I need to know it wasn't luck. Do it again. Walk me through it again." So he did. And she did the sequence herself this time from memory, hand on the switch. "Hello, Bella." The pause the key, and Bella roared to life a second time, obedient and joyful, and hers. And Victoria laughed out loud. And this time, there was no fear in it at all, only a daughter who'd gotten her father back for the length of a heartbeat. She killed the engine again, and she sat there. And then slowly she turned to look at the man crouched in her open door. "You gave me that," she said. "No." Daniel shook his head. Your father gave you that. I just knew where he hid the door. Daniel. Her voice was raw. Don't. Don't do the humble thing right now. 5 years. 5 years and the best men in the world. And you... She stopped. Steadied. You gave me back the last minute I'll ever have with my father. There is no amount of money on this earth. Then don't offer me money, Daniel said, and something in the way he said it made her stop. Please, don't make this about money. Everybody in my old life made everything about money, and it's the reason I've got a mop instead of a name. Just let me have this. Let me have done one good thing that wasn't about money. He looked at the car. I needed to fix this as much as you did. You just don't know why yet. Then tell me why. And Daniel opened his mouth to answer, and that was when Marcus Bell's voice came down the ramp tight and strange. It started. They both looked up. Marcus was standing at the top of the ramp, and he must have heard it. Of course he'd heard it. You could probably have heard that engine 3 counties over, and his face was doing something complicated, and Victoria braced for the anger, for the accusation, for the party trick speech. But that wasn't what came. I heard it start, Marcus said again, and he came down the ramp slowly, and his eyes were fixed on the car like it was a thing that shouldn't exist. Twice. I heard it start twice. He stopped a few feet away. In 30 years I have never... He stopped, swallowed. I flew a man in from Maranello. Do you understand a man who worked the line? He put his hands on that engine and told me it was flawless and dead both at once, and he'd never seen anything like it, and he went home, and he wouldn't take my calls after because it embarrassed him. Marcus looked at Daniel, and it cost him something enormous. Victoria could see it costing him. And you started it with a mop in the corner and a story about a dead man. It wasn't a story, Daniel said quietly. No, Marcus said. I'm starting to understand that it wasn't. He was quiet for a moment. How? And Daniel told him. Not the personal part, not yet. Just the mechanical truth, the bracket and the mechanism, and the switch, and the sequence, and the pause, built in on purpose. And Marcus listened, and Victoria watched something happen to Marcus Bell that she would not have believed if she hadn't seen it, which was that a proud man listened to a truth that humiliated him and let it. The switch, Marcus said when Daniel finished. Under the dash. The little one that connects to nothing. That's the one. Marcus closed his eyes. I have sat in that car 40 times. I have had my hand 6 inches from it for a year and a half. He opened his eyes. And I never touched it because it connects to nothing, and I'm a professional, and professionals don't waste time on things that connect to nothing. That's exactly why he hid it there, Daniel said. There was no cruelty in it. If anything, there was something like sympathy. He knew a professional would never look. He was counting on it. The lock was designed to defeat expertise, Marcus. Not because he had anything against experts. Because he knew his daughter wasn't going to grow up to be one, and he didn't want the car to belong to the first clever stranger who could out-expert it. He wanted it to belong to her. Daniel looked at Victoria. Only to her. Marcus was quiet for a long, long moment. Then he did something that made Victoria's breath catch. He put out his hand. To Daniel. Marcus Bell, he said like they hadn't spent 2 days as enemies, like he was introducing himself fresh. I've been rude to you, twice, in front of your employer. He kept his hand out. I don't apologize often. I'm doing it now. Daniel looked at the hand, and then he took it. Daniel Carter, he said. Carter. Marcus frowned suddenly like a word had snagged on something. Carter. That's... His frown deepened. I know that name. Not from this. From... And then his eyes went wide and his grip on Daniel's hand tightened, and his whole face changed. Wait. Daniel Carter. You can't be the Daniel Carter. The one who... He stopped. He actually took a step back. The Blackwood thing, 6-7 years ago, the counterfeit restorations. You're that Daniel Carter. The garage went very still. Daniel's face closed like a door. That's a name I don't use anymore, he said. You blew the whistle on Blackwood Classics, Marcus said, and his voice had climbed disbelieving. You, my God. You're the reason half the provenance in this industry got re-audited. You're the reason 3 houses folded. You're the guy who—" He turned to Victoria, and now he was talking fast, the pieces slamming together in real time. "Ms. Harrington, 7 years ago, this man, if it's him, if it's really him, this man was the top restoration engineer in the country, working for the biggest classic house in the business, Blackwood Classics, and he found out they were doing counterfeit restorations, taking cheap wrecks, dressing them up with forged provenance, and selling them as matching numbers originals for millions, to collectors, to museums. And he didn't take the payoff. He went public." Marcus stared at Daniel like he'd never seen him. It was the biggest scandal in the history of the field. And then he just vanished. Nobody ever knew what happened to him. "Now you know," Daniel said quietly. "He got a mop." Victoria felt the floor tilt. She'd known some of it. Her security chief had found the shape of it at midnight. The big life, the ugly thing, the vanishing. But she hadn't had the name of it, and now she did, and it changed everything, because it meant Daniel Carter hadn't just lost a career. He'd chosen to lose it. He'd stood at the exact cliff her father had built into the car, the choice between the safe way and the true way, and he'd jumped, and it had cost him everything. "Why?" Victoria said. Her voice was barely there. "Blackwood offered you a payoff. You said it yourself, everybody in your old life made everything about money. You could have taken it. You could have kept your name, your career, your everything. Why didn't you?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because of Silas," he said. "Your teacher." "My teacher." Daniel's jaw worked. The counterfeits they were selling, some of them the best ones, the ones that fooled everybody. They were using Silas's old techniques to do it. His methods. The things he taught me. The things he taught a whole generation. The beautiful patient work he did because he loved these machines. They'd turned it into a tool for lying. His voice roughened. "Silas was dying by then. Cancer. And I went to see him in the hospital, and I told him what Blackwood was doing with his life's work, and I asked him what I should do. Because they'd made me an offer, Victoria. A big one. Enough to set my wife and me up forever. My wife was—" He stopped. Started again. "My wife was pregnant with Lily. And I had this offer on the table that would have meant she never worked another day, and our kid would have wanted for nothing, and all I had to do was keep my mouth shut about a few cars." "What did Silas say?" Victoria whispered. Daniel's eyes were wet. "He said, 'Danny, I taught you to hear what a machine is trying to say. Those cars are trying to say they're liars. Are you going to be the one man who can hear it and pretends he can't?'" Daniel wiped his face with the back of his hand, rough, embarrassed. "He died 2 days later, and I went home and I looked at my pregnant wife, and I turned down the money, and I burned my whole life down." He laughed, and it was a terrible sound. "And you know what the worst part is? My wife Sarah, she backed me. She said, 'We didn't marry each other for the money, Danny, do the right thing.' She was proud of me." His voice broke fully now. "She was proud of me right up until the industry blacklisted me, and the legal bills ate our savings, and I couldn't get work anywhere, and the stress, the doctors said. It wasn't the stress, they said these things just happen, but I know." He stopped. He couldn't go on for a moment. "She got sick. Right after Lily was born, and she was gone by the time Lily was 5. And I have spent every day since wondering whether if I'd just taken the money, if I'd just kept my mouth shut, she'd have had less stress and more doctors and be alive right now, upstairs reading our daughter the Dragon Book instead of me doing it alone at midnight." The garage was utterly silent. Victoria was crying. Marcus Bell, who didn't apologize, often had turned away, was staring hard at the wall, his hand over his mouth. "So that's why I've got a mop," Daniel said, and his voice was steadier now, wrung out and steady. "That's why there's no Daniel Carter in any registry. I took my name out of the world on purpose because the world took Sarah out of it, and I decided that Lily was going to have one parent who stayed invisible and safe and present, instead of a father who was famous for being right about something that killed her mother." He looked at Victoria. "You asked me yesterday why I care about your father's car. Why I'd give you 48 hours of my life. You want the real answer now." "Yes," Victoria breathed. Because your father built a machine that only opens for a person who does the hard right thing instead of the easy clever thing. Daniel's voice shook. A machine that rewards the one who cares over the one who's smart. A machine that waited 5 years in the dark being called worthless because it refused to give itself to anybody who hadn't earned it. He put his hand on the Ferrari gentle reverent. Victoria, I've spent 3 years, I threw my whole life away for nothing. That I was a fool. That doing the right thing just cost me my wife and my name and left me with a mop and a bus pass. And then I walked into this garage and I found a machine that a dying craftsman and a loving father built to prove in steel and springs that the person who does the hard right thing is the one who deserves the treasure. His voice broke one final time. Your father's car told me I wasn't a fool. After 3 years, the first thing to tell me I did the right thing was a dead man's Ferrari. So don't offer me money, Victoria. This car already paid me. It paid me more than money ever could. For a long moment, nobody could speak. It was Marcus who broke it, and when he spoke, his voice was thick and strange. I called you a con man, Marcus said. He turned around. His eyes were red. Yesterday, I stood right there and I told her not to be the mark. I told her men who want things from grieving people know how to sell a miracle. He shook his head slowly. And the whole time you were the one man in this industry who threw away millions rather than sell a lie. You're the opposite of a con man. You're the thing con men are afraid of. He drew a breath. I've spent 30 years thinking I could read people. And I read you completely wrong. And I read you wrong in the exact way that flatters me and insults you, and He stopped. I'm ashamed of myself. I want you to know that. I'm ashamed. You were protecting her, Daniel said. That's not shameful. That's the job. Don't let me off the hook that easy, Marcus said. I was protecting my own pride. There's a difference, and you know it because you're a man who chose the hard difference once and paid for it your whole life. He straightened. So let me choose the hard one now for once. He turned to Victoria. Ms. Harrington, I've represented you for 5 years. I've billed you God. I've billed you a fortune, and I earned some of it, and I wasted a lot of it flying in experts to solve a problem that a man with a mop and a conscience solved in 2 days. He took a breath. I'm going to make it right. I want to void every invoice from the last 18 months. The whole Ferrari campaign. All of it. Consider it done. Victoria blinked. Marcus, that's hundreds of thousands of... I know exactly what it is. I wrote them. Marcus's jaw set. I don't apologize often, and I've never once refunded a client in 30 years, and I'm doing both today, because I stood in a room with a better man than me and called him a fraud, and there's a bill for that, and I'm going to pay it. He looked at Daniel. It's the smallest right thing I can do. I'm aware it doesn't cost me what your right thing cost you. But it's mine to do so. I'm doing it. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Silas would have liked you, he said quietly. He always said the ones worth teaching are the ones who can stand to be wrong out loud. Something in Marcus's face broke open at that some 30-year-old crust of pride, and he had to look away again. And then Victoria stood up out of the car. She stood, and she smoothed her suit, and she wiped her face one last time. And when she turned to Daniel, there was something different in her, something the businesswoman and the grieving daughter had negotiated between them in the last few minutes and agreed on. I'm not going to offer you money, she said. Thank you. I'm going to offer you something else, and I need you to hear all of it before you say no, because you're going to want to say no. She squared up to him. I have spent 5 years learning that money buys experts and experts fail. I have a garage full of vehicles like this one, my father's collection. 40 years of it, cars that mean something. Cars with stories. Cars that deserve to be understood and not just owned. And I have been trusting them to men who read the wrong page. She lifted her chin. I want to create a position, Director of Historic Vehicle Preservation. Real title, real salary, real authority, real everything. And I want you to take it. Daniel started to shake his head. Victoria, I'm not finished. Hear all of it. She stepped closer. This isn't charity, and it isn't a reward, and it isn't me feeling sorry for the man who made me cry today. I don't build my company out of pity. I'd have gone broke 20 years ago. This is the coldest, smartest business decision I've made in a year." Her voice hardened into something Marcus recognized from the negotiating table. "You are, by the testimony of the best men in this industry, and by the evidence of my own eyes and ears this morning, the most gifted person alive at the one thing I most need done. And you've been hiding in a janitor's uniform for 3 years for reasons that break my heart, but that also mean I can get you before anyone else in the world realizes you're back. That's not pity, Daniel. That's me being greedy. That's me seeing a thing of immense value that everybody else looked past and grabbing it before they wise up." She almost smiled. "Which, if you think about it, is exactly what you did with my father's car." Daniel had no answer for that. "But," Victoria went on, and now her voice softened again, "here's the part you actually need to hear. You said you went invisible for Lily, so she'd have one parent who was present and safe instead of famous and right." She held his eyes. "I understand that. I do. But Daniel, what does she learn watching you hide? What does your daughter learn about doing the right thing? If the lesson she grows up with is that doing it cost her mother her life and her father his name and left him pushing a mop in the dark, ashamed of the very gift that makes him extraordinary." She let that land. "You told me your father figure asked you, 'Are you going to be the one man who can hear it and pretend he can't?' And you weren't. You heard it. You paid everything for hearing it." Her voice dropped. "So don't spend the rest of your life pretending you can't hear it anymore. Don't teach Lily that the reward for having a gift and a conscience is a lifetime of hiding both. Teach her the other thing. Teach her that the world knocked her father down, and it took a while, and it took a dead man's Ferrari, but he got back up." The garage was silent, except for the tick of the cooling engine. Daniel Carter stood there, and Victoria watched 3 years of careful invisibility war, with something older and truer underneath it. And she watched for the second time in an hour a man come back to life. But he didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he asked a question, and it was the last question Victoria expected, and it changed the ground under all of them. "When your father restored this car," Daniel said slowly, "you said it took him 9 years, and Silas built the lock 20 years ago." He frowned. "But you said your father gave you the car when he died, 5 years ago, and it ran at the funeral, and then it stopped 2 weeks later." He looked up. "Victoria, who drove it in those 2 weeks between the funeral and the day it stopped? Who had it?" Victoria blinked. My estate did. It was here, in this garage. But who touched it? Who had access? Because a lock like that doesn't just—" Daniel stopped. Something crossed his face, something cold. He crouched down fast beside the car back at the bracket, and this time he didn't just look. He pulled a small light from his pocket and put his face right up against the underside of the machine, and Victoria heard his breath change. "Daniel, what is it?" He didn't answer right away. His light stayed fixed on something up under the firewall, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat and careful. The voice of a man who's just found a thing he was hoping not to find. "Your father built the lock so the car would stop for anyone but you," Daniel said slowly. "That's true. That's what it does." He came out from under the car, and his face was grim, and he was holding something small in his fingers, something he'd worked loose from up inside the mechanism, something that did not belong there. But it didn't stop on its own 2 weeks after the funeral, Victoria. He held the small thing up into the light so she could see it. Somebody stopped it. Somebody who knew about the lock. Somebody who got into this garage in those 2 weeks and did this. He turned the small object, and now she could see it wasn't old. Wasn't your father's careful decades-old work. It was new, crude, deliberate, jammed into the heart of her father's mechanism, on purpose, to make sure the car would never start again. His eyes met hers. This car didn't break, Victoria, and your father didn't just hide a message in it. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Somebody sabotaged it, and they knew exactly where to reach to do it, which means whoever did this. He stopped. "Which means what?" Victoria said. Her voice had gone very small. Daniel looked at the crude little object in his hand, then at Victoria, Then up the ramp toward the great silent house where her father's estate was run, where his staff still worked, where the people closest to Robert Harrington in his final days still walked the halls. Which means somebody close to your father, Daniel said quietly. Didn't want you to hear his last message, and went to a great deal of trouble to make sure you never would. That's not possible, Victoria said. But even as she said it, she heard how weak it sounded, because she'd said the exact same words that morning about a coincidence that turned out to be true, and Daniel had taught her something in the last 2 days without meaning to, which was that when your gut says that's not possible, it usually means that's exactly what happened and you don't want it to be. Look at it, Daniel said gently. He held the small object closer. You don't have to take my word. Look at the difference. Everything your father built in this car, everything Silas built. It's beautiful. It's patient. The metal's finished. The edges are broken clean. The welds are like calligraphy. 20 years of care in every millimeter. He turned the crude little piece in the light. And then there's this. Hacksaw marks. A file used in a hurry. Jammed in with pliers you can see where the jaws bit. This wasn't made by a craftsman, Victoria. This was made by somebody in a panic in the dark, who knew enough about the mechanism to know where to reach, but didn't have the hands or the time to do it clean. He looked up at her. Somebody who knew the car had a secret, who knew there was a message, and who needed it to stay buried so badly that they were willing to butcher your father's life's work to bury it. Victoria took the little piece from his fingers. It weighed almost nothing. It had cost her 5 years and a fortune and every ounce of hope she'd learned to strangle. Who knew? She whispered. Who could possibly have known there was a message in the car I didn't know? I forgot the hello, I forgot Bella, I forgot all of it. If his own daughter didn't know, then it was somebody your father trusted more than he trusted your memory, Daniel said. Somebody he told. Marcus had gone very quiet during all of this, and now he spoke slowly like a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. Ms. Harrington, when your father was dying, who was with him at the end? Who ran his affairs in those last months? Victoria's face changed. Gerald, she said. Who's Gerald? Gerald Voss. My father's everything. Estate manager, personal attorney, executor of the will. He'd been with my father for 30 years. Her voice was going faster now, the pieces moving. He ran the whole estate in the last year when Dad got too sick to. He handled everything. The funeral. The transfer of the car. He was the one who... She stopped dead. He was the one who told me the car had stopped. 2 weeks after the funeral. He called me and said the Ferrari wouldn't start, and he was so sorry, and he'd bring in the best people to fix it. Her hand went to her mouth. He brought in the first experts. He set up the whole Daniel. Gerald arranged every single expert I ever hired for that car. For 5 years. He handled all of it. He said he was taking it off my plate because I was grieving. Taking it off your plate, Daniel repeated softly. Or making sure the only people who ever touched it were people he chose. The garage went cold. He'd have known about the message, Victoria said, and her voice was shaking now, not with grief, but with a rage that was just beginning to understand itself. If anyone knew, it was Gerald. 30 years. My father told him everything. If Dad built a secret into that car, if he planned to leave me a message inside it, Gerald would have been the one who knew the plan. He'd have known what the car was going to say the day I finally opened it. She looked at Daniel with dawning horror. Which means he knew there was something in that message he couldn't afford me to hear. Question is what? Daniel said. No. Victoria's jaw set. Question is where? Because you said it, the message isn't just the car starting. The car starting is the door. What's on the other side of the door? What did my father actually want to tell me? She turned to the Ferrari. Daniel, the photograph, the one you know. There was no photograph that was... She shook her head, confusing herself. You found a mechanism and notes, but you keep saying a message that waited 5 years. Where is it? If the car is the lock, what's the thing it unlocks? And Daniel got very still because she'd asked the right question. The question he'd been circling since midnight, and he didn't have the whole answer, but he had the shape of it. When I sat in the car last night, he said slowly, I did the mechanical part. I reset the lock, but I felt something the sequence does that I couldn't explain. When you turn the key, the full sequence, the real one, the one you did this morning, something else moves. Not just the ignition. There's a second linkage. It runs back. He turned toward the car. Silas never built a lock that only did one thing. He didn't have it in him. Everything he made did two jobs at once minimum. The lock starts the car, yes. But the same motion, the same completed sequence, it releases something else. A compartment. A drawer. Something that only opens once the car has been correctly started by the right person. He looked at Victoria. Your father didn't hide a message in the car, so you'd read it the day you got the car. He hid it so you couldn't read it until you'd earned the car, until you'd learned it, until you'd said hello. His voice dropped. The message only opens for the person who passed the test. That's why Gerald couldn't just take it. He couldn't open the compartment either. He didn't know the sequence. He's not the daughter the car would never open for him. All he could do was make sure nobody ever passed the test. So he jammed the lock. For 5 years. Victoria's breath caught. It's still in there. Whatever my father left me, it's still in there, Daniel said. Sealed, waiting. Because the only person who could open it is the only person Gerald spent 5 years and your money keeping away from it. He held out his hand toward the car. You started her twice this morning, but you didn't complete the full sequence to the end because I stopped you. I had you shut down early both times to make sure the ignition held. We never ran it all the way through to where the second linkage fires. His eyes met hers. You want to know what your father died trying to tell you? Get back in the car, and this time don't stop. Victoria didn't move for a moment. Then she got back in. Marcus came closer, drawn in despite himself and the three of them. The CEO, the janitor, and the reformed enemy gathered around a machine that had been called worthless for 5 years and turned out to be the most valuable thing in the building. Same as before, Daniel said, crouched in the open door. Switch. Hello. The pause. The key. But this time, after she starts, don't shut her down. Let her run and turn the key one more click, past the start position all the way forward and hold it. That's the second motion. That's the one nobody ever got to because nobody ever started her. Hold it and the compartment should release. Victoria put her hand on the switch. Hello, Bella, she said, and her voice didn't break this time. It was steady. It was a daughter who'd stopped being afraid. The pause. The key. The roar. Bella came alive a third time, sure and strong, and Victoria turned the key one more click past start all the way forward and held it. For a second, nothing. Then, from somewhere in the dash, low and hidden, came a soft mechanical click. A different click. A deeper one. And a panel. Victoria had looked at 10,000 times. A plain, unremarkable panel below the glove box that she'd have sworn was solid, dropped open on a hinge, nobody knew was there. Victoria killed the engine with a shaking hand. The garage rang with silence. Inside the compartment was an envelope. Yellowed. Sealed. And on the front in handwriting she would have known anywhere in the handwriting that had signed her school forms and her birthday cards, and at the very end, a will. She'd been too broken to read closely one word. Her name. Victoria. She reached for it and stopped her hand hovering, because once she opened it, there was no unopening it, and she'd spent 5 years wanting exactly this, and now that it was here, she was terrified of what it would say. I'll step out, Daniel said quietly, starting to rise. This is yours. You should read it alone. No. Victoria's hand shot out and gripped his wrist. You stay. Both of you. She looked at Daniel, then at Marcus. I've been alone with this car for 5 years. I don't want to be alone with it for this. So they stayed. Victoria took the envelope. She broke the seal her father had pressed shut with his own dying hands, and she unfolded the letter and she read it out loud because her voice was the only thing keeping her upright, and because some part of her needed to hear her father's words in the air of the garage where he'd been called worthless for 5 years. My Victoria, she read, and her voice caught on the very first words. If you're reading this, then you did it. You said hello. You learned her. You earned her the way I always hoped you would. And that means you're ready to hear the rest, which is the real reason I built the lock." She had to stop. Breathe. Marcus put his hand on the workbench like he needed to hold on to something. "You always thought I gave you a car," she read. "I didn't. I gave you a test, and I'm sorry for that, and I'm not sorry both at once. The way a father is about the hard things he does for love. Because here is what I know about you, my brilliant, impatient girl. You will inherit more money than sense should allow. You will be surrounded for the rest of your life by people who are smart and polished and expensive and wrong. And you will be tempted over and over to trust the ones with the best credentials and the highest bills, because that's what powerful people do. They buy the best and assume the best is the truest." Victoria's voice was shaking hard now. "But the best isn't the truest, sweetheart. I learned that the hard way, and I built you a car to learn it the gentle way. The person who finally opens this car won't be the most expensive expert. It'll be the one who cared enough to listen. Trust that person, Victoria, whoever they turn out to be. In a world full of people selling you brilliance, trust the one who gave you understanding." The silence in the garage was absolute. Daniel had gone completely white. Because Robert Harris, 5 years dead, had just described the exact man crouched in his daughter's open car door, and none of them could pretend otherwise, and the impossible patient machine had done exactly what it was built to do. "There's more," Victoria whispered, and she kept reading. "And now the part I hoped you'd never need, but I'm a careful man, and careful men plan for the worst. If something has gone wrong, if this car sat silent for a long time, if people told you it was broken, if it took you years and heartbreak to finally open it, then someone interfered. And I think I know who. Gerald." Victoria's head came up. "He wrote it," she breathed. "He wrote Gerald's name. 5 years ago. He knew." She read on faster, now the words tumbling. "I've trusted Gerald 30 years, and I trust him still with most things. But I've seen something in him this last year, watching him handle my affairs while I got weak. A hunger. He thinks I don't notice how the accounts move. I notice. I'm dying, not blind. If I'm right about him, then the moment I'm gone, he'll move on the estate, and he'll count on you being too grief-struck to check his math, and he'll count on me being too dead to stop him. So I've made a stop, and I've hidden it in the one place he can't reach and can't fake his way into. In the second compartment, behind this letter. Push the panel." Victoria's hands were flying now. She reached into the compartment, and behind where the envelope had sat there was a second panel, and she pushed it, and it gave. And behind it was a slim leather folio, and she pulled it out and opened it with shaking hands. Documents, pages of them. And clipped to the front a second note in her father's hand. The real books, Vicky. Not the ones Gerald keeps. Everything he's moved, every account, every signature he forged. I've been tracking it for a year and copying it here where only you can find it because only you can open this car. If you're reading this, you have everything you need to take back what's yours and put that man where he belongs. I couldn't stop him while I was alive without tipping my hand and getting cut out of my own daughter's life. So I built you a trap that only springs after I'm gone, and only in the hands of the one person he could never be. Love him or hate him, the one who opened this car for you is the one who can be trusted. I love you past the moon, kiddo. Go get him, Dad." Victoria lowered the folio. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The three of them stood in the garage with a dead man's careful trap, finally sprung 5 years late exactly as designed. "Love you past the moon," Victoria whispered. And then she laughed, wet and broken and amazed. "That's Daniel, that's what Lily says to you. You said it on the phone." She looked up. "I love you to the moon. I love you past it. That's what my father and I said. That's what—" Her face crumpled and rebuilt itself into something fierce. "He's been dead 5 years, and he just handed me the man who robbed me gift-wrapped and told me who to trust while he did it." She pressed the folio to her chest. "Oh, Dad, you careful, impossible, wonderful old man." And then the businesswoman surfaced all the way, cold and clear and terrible, and Marcus actually took a step back from the look on her face. "Gerald Voss has been executor of my father's estate for 5 years, Victoria said quietly. "He has managed my father's foundation, my father's collection, my father's accounts. He has sat across from me at Christmas. He has held my hand at the memorial. He has called me kiddo, like he had the right, like he was standing in for—" Her voice went flat and lethal. "And every single one of those 5 years he was moving my father's money and paying strangers with my money to keep my father's last words locked in a car so I would never find the proof that's been sitting 18 inches from the ignition the whole time." "Ms. Harrington," Marcus said carefully, "if those documents are what your father says they are, you don't go to Gerald. You go to the authorities, and you go quietly before he knows you're onto him." The second he realizes that car started. "He already knows," Daniel said. They both turned. Daniel was looking at the security camera up in the corner of the garage, the same camera Victoria had watched him through at midnight, and his face was grim. "Who monitors these feeds?" Daniel said. "The estate cameras. Who has access?" Victoria's blood ran cold. "The estate manager's office," she said slowly. "Gerald set up the whole security system. He has access to everything. Every camera, every—" She stopped. "He'd have gotten an alert. A janitor working alone on the Ferrari all night. Me down here at dawn. The engine. Daniel, that engine was loud enough to wake the dead, if he was monitoring anything at all." Daniel was already moving. "How far is his office from here?" "He's not on site today. He works from the downtown." And then Victoria's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, and she went white. She turned the screen so they could see it. A text from Gerald Voss. "Victoria, wonderful news. I heard the Ferrari finally started. Robert would be overjoyed. I'm coming by the estate this afternoon. We should celebrate. And we should talk about the collection. I've had an offer on it. I think you'll want to hear. Time-sensitive best. We handle the paperwork today while I'm there. See you at 4. Gee, he's coming here," Victoria said. "Today, at 4, with paperwork." She looked up. "He's not celebrating. He heard the car started, and he's panicking, and he's coming to get me to sign something before I open that compartment. He doesn't know I already have." Her hand tightened on the folio. "He thinks he's still ahead of me." Daniel looked at the folio, then at the text, then at Victoria, and something settled in his face, some old instinct waking up, the same instinct that had once made him blow the whistle on the biggest fraud in his industry and burn his life down for the truth. "Then he made a mistake," Daniel said quietly. "He told you he's coming. He gave you 4 hours." He nodded at the leather folio pressed against her chest. 4 hours to read every page of what your father left you. 4 hours to call the right people. 4 hours to be ready. His jaw set. "Your father built a trap that only springs in the hands of the one person Gerald could never be. Well, it sprang. And now the man who spent 5 years making sure you'd stay a grieving girl who couldn't check his math." Daniel's voice was very steady. "Is about to walk through that door and find out you're not grieving anymore. You're your father's daughter, and you've got the books." Victoria looked down at the folio, then up at the 2 men standing with her, the one who'd apologized for reading her wrong, and the one who'd read the whole thing right when nobody else on earth could. 4 hours, she said, and the fear was gone from her voice completely now. "Marcus, call your attorney, the real one, the criminal one, not the auction people. Daniel," she turned to him, "you're the only person here who knows how to read what my father hid, and you're the only person Gerald doesn't know exists. When he walks in at 4 and sees you standing next to that car, he'll know the janitor started it," Daniel finished. "He'll know I'm the one who beat his lock." "Then let him know," Victoria said. And for the first time in 5 years, Victoria Harrington smiled the way her father used to smile right before he closed the deal. Let him walk in here at 4 o'clock, all smiles and paperwork, ready to rob a grieving girl one last time. And let the first thing he sees be the man everybody overlooked standing next to the car that finally talked. 4 hours moved like 4 minutes. Victoria spread her father's folio across the workbench, and the 3 of them read it page by page, and what they found was worse than she'd feared, and exactly what her father had promised. Gerald Voss hadn't just skimmed a little off the top. He'd built an entire second architecture underneath the estate shell. Accounts and forged authorizations, and a slow patient theft that had been running for 5 years, draining the foundation her father had built to fund scholarships for kids who wanted to become engineers, kids like the grease-under-the-nails boy Silas had once taken in. He's been stealing from the scholarship fund, Victoria said, and her voice was very quiet, which Marcus had learned to fear. My father's whole reason for the foundation. Gerald's been robbing the one thing Dad built to give other people what he gave me. How much? Marcus asked. Victoria turned a page. Read the number. Set the page down very carefully. Enough that he's not going to walk away when I confront him, she said. Enough that a man will do almost anything rather than lose it. She looked up. Which means when he gets here, he's not going to be the charming uncle who held my hand at the memorial. He's going to be a cornered animal in a good suit. Then you don't confront him alone, Daniel said. And you don't confront him without the police already understanding exactly what they're walking into. That was the second hour. Marcus's criminal attorney, a sharp, quiet woman named Diane, who arrived within 40 minutes and asked exactly the right questions. Looked at the folio, looked at the crude piece of metal. Daniel had pulled from the car. From the car looked at 5 years of expert invoices that Gerald had arranged and Victoria had paid, and said one thing that put steel in all their spines. He documented his own crime, Diane said. Your father. This isn't a hunch or a grievance. This is a forensic accounting done by the victim dated with source records. Most fraud cases take investigators 2 years to build. Your father handed you a finished one. She closed the folio. The only question is whether Gerald says something this afternoon that turns a paper case into a confession. And men like Gerald almost always do if you let them think they're still winning. Then we let him think he's winning, Victoria said. The third hour was the plan. It was Daniel in the end who shaped it because Daniel understood something none of them did. Something he'd learned the hard way 7 years ago in a different scandal with a different set of powerful men who'd tried to buy his silence. A man like Gerald doesn't get scared into a confession, Daniel said. He gets flattered into one. He spent 5 years believing he's the smartest man in every room, that your father was a sentimental old fool with a broken car, that you're a grieving girl who signs what she's told. So don't come at him strong. Come at him soft. Let him walk in and see exactly what he expects to see. Let him get comfortable. Let him get all the way to the part where he thinks he's about to win, and then let him find out the janitor started the car. Daniel's jaw tightened. The confession isn't going to come from fear, Victoria. It's going to come from the second he realizes he already lost and can't stand it, and has to tell you how clever he was to make it hurt less. Pride is the crack. Wait for the pride. At 3:50, Diane and a detective she trusted set up in the estate manager's office 2 doors down, where the security feeds ran, where they could hear and see everything the garage cameras carried. Marcus stood where a lawyer would naturally stand, and Daniel, get behind the car, Victoria told him. Under it, working, exactly like he'd expect a maintenance man to be. I want the first thing he sees to be me and the car and the celebration he's expecting. I don't want him to see you until it matters. You sure? Daniel said. Once he sees me, there's no going back. He'll know. That's the point. Victoria looked at him. I've spent 5 years being the girl everybody managed. My father spent his last year building me a way to stop being managed. I'm not going to waste it hiding in a corner. She almost smiled. Besides, you've been the man nobody sees for 3 years. Let's use it one last time. And then, let's be done with it forever. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. He hurt a lot of kids, Daniel said quietly. The scholarship fund. Kids who wanted what I had. What Silas gave me. His voice roughened. I spent 3 years thinking my gift only ever cost people. Let me use it to take back what he stole from kids who never got a Silas. He nodded. Put me under the car. I'll be ready. At 3:58, a car came up the drive, smooth, expensive, unhurried, the car of a man who had no idea the ground had already opened under him. And at 4 o'clock exactly, Gerald Voss walked into the garage with a leather portfolio under his arm and a smile on his face, like a man arriving at his own victory party. Victoria. He came down the ramp with his arms half open, warm, avuncular, and for 1 second, Victoria felt the old pull of it. The man who'd been at every birthday, every graduation, every funeral. Sweetheart, look at you standing next to her. I heard the news this morning and I nearly wept. Robert's car running again. After all this time. He shook his head, marveling. How? After everything, who finally cracked it? Some new specialist, Victoria said lightly. She'd practiced the lightness. You know how it is. You throw enough money at a problem, eventually, somebody expensive gets lucky. Gerald laughed, delighted, and it was exactly the wrong laugh, because Victoria heard the relief under it. The relief of a man who'd just been told the car got fixed by a stranger who'd already left, not by anyone who might have looked too closely. Well, thank God, Gerald said. Thank God. Your father would be over the moon. He set his portfolio on the workbench, right next to where her father's real folio had been an hour before now, safely in Diane's hands 2 doors down, and he patted it. Now, I hate to mix business with a beautiful moment like this, but the offer I mentioned is genuinely time-sensitive, and I'd be failing your father if I didn't press it. There's a collector, private, discreet, very serious, who wants the entire collection, all 40 cars, including this one. He tapped the Ferrari's fender, and Victoria watched Daniel's shadow go still underneath it. It's a staggering number, Victoria. Life-changing. And frankly, sweetheart, it's time. These cars are an anchor. The maintenance, the storage, the heartbreak. Look what this one alone put you through. Let me take it all off your plate. Sign today, and by next week, you'll never have to think about any of it again. There it was. Take it off your plate. The same words he'd used 5 years ago about the car. That's a lot of paperwork to sign in one afternoon, Victoria said. I've made it simple. I've handled everything, you know. I always handle everything. Gerald opened the portfolio and slid papers toward her, and a pen, that same warm smile. Just where I've marked. I've protected all your interests, same as I've done since your father passed. Same as I'll always do. And Victoria Harrington looked at the pen and looked at the man who'd called her sweetheart at her father's grave while he robbed the fund her father built for other people's children, and she felt the last of the grieving girl burn away and leave something her father would have recognized. Gerald, she said, before I sign anything, I have a question about the car. Of course, anything. How did you know it was broken? Gerald's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. I'm sorry. 5 years ago, 2 weeks after the funeral, you called me and told me the Ferrari had stopped running. Victoria kept her voice light, curious, a daughter making conversation. I've just always wondered, who was driving it? How did anyone even notice it stopped? It was just sitting in the garage. Nobody was using it. Oh! Gerald waved a hand smooth, but Victoria saw him reach for the answer instead of just having it. The staff, I imagine. Someone tried to move it for cleaning, and it wouldn't start. I don't recall exactly. Sweetheart, it was 5 years and a great deal of grief ago, right? Victoria nodded slowly. It's just funny. Because the man who fixed it this morning told me something strange. He said the car didn't break on its own. She let it hang. He said someone jammed it, on purpose, with a piece of metal shoved up into a mechanism only a person who knew the car's secret could have found. She tilted her head. Isn't that strange, Gerald? Who would have known the car had a secret? The garage went very quiet. Gerald's smile was still there, but it had gone rigid, a smile held in place by will alone. That sounds like nonsense, frankly. Whoever this man is, he's telling you a story. These specialists, they love to make themselves the hero. They invent drama to justify the bill. He didn't charge me anything, Victoria said. That's the other strange thing. Victoria. Gerald's voice changed just slightly, the warmth thinning. Sweetheart, you've been through so much. You're standing next to your father's car for the first time in years. You're emotional, and now some con artist has filled your head with conspiracy theories to make himself seem important. This is exactly what I've been protecting you from. This is why I handle these things. Now please. He tapped the papers, and there was an edge in it now, an urgency he couldn't quite keep down. Let's just get this signed and get these vultures away from you and put all of it behind us. Today. Now. Why today, Gerald? Because the offer expires. No. Victoria's voice was quiet, and it cut through the garage like a blade. Why today? Why the same afternoon you found out the car started? 5 years you let those cars sit. 5 years, no collector, no time-sensitive offer, no urgency. And the very day the Ferrari runs, you show up with papers that need signing right now this hour before I've had a chance to do anything but stand here. She stepped toward him. You didn't come to celebrate Gerald. You came because the car talked. And you needed me to sign the collection away before I found out what it said. Gerald's face had gone gray. I don't know what you think I think, Victoria said, that my father knew you were stealing from him. I think he knew for a year before he died. And I think he was too smart to accuse you while he was alive, because you controlled everything, and you'd have found a way to cut him off from me, to poison the well, to make a dying old man look paranoid. Her voice was rising now, not loud, but rising 5 years of it. So he built me a trap. He put the truth somewhere you could never reach it. Inside the one machine that would only ever open for me. And you knew, didn't you? You knew there was something in that car. You didn't know exactly what, but you knew Robert, and you knew he was watching you at the end, and you couldn't take the risk. So you jammed his life's work with a hacksawed piece of scrap, and you spent 5 years, and my money making sure no one ever got it open. That's insane, Gerald whispered, but he'd taken a step back. There's no proof of any. Come out, Daniel. And Daniel Carter rolled out from under the Ferrari and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag unhurried, and the crude jammed piece of metal sat on the workbench between them, where he'd placed it an hour ago, and Gerald Voss looked at the man in the maintenance uniform and did not recognize him at all, which was somehow the worst part. This is the con artist, Gerald said, rallying, grasping. This is who's filled your head. Victoria, look at him. He's a maintenance worker. He's nobody. He's exactly the kind of... His name is Daniel Carter, Victoria said. And Daniel watched the name land on Gerald Voss, the way it had landed on Marcus the day before. Except Gerald was an attorney who'd spent 30 years in the world of high-value assets and provenance and fraud. And the name hit him harder and faster, and with a terror Marcus had never shown. Carter, Gerald breathed. All the color went out of him at once. The Blackwood. You're the Blackwood whistleblower. The one who... He looked at the jammed metal on the bench, and then at the folio in Marcus's hands, and then at Victoria, and Daniel actually watched the man's whole strategy collapse in real time. Watched him understand that of all the people on Earth who might have opened that car, the one who had was the single most dangerous man alive to a fraud, a man who'd already burned his entire life to the ground once rather than let a lie stand. No, Gerald said. No, whatever he's told you, whatever he thinks he found. He didn't find anything, Victoria said. My father did, 5 years ago, and he wrote it down, every account, every forged signature, every dollar you took from the scholarship fund. She watched Gerald's face come apart. He copied all of it, and he hid it in the car behind the message he left me, and he told me who to trust and who to send to prison in his own handwriting. And I read it 2 hours ago, Gerald. I've had it for 2 hours. There is no paper you can put in front of me now that means anything at all. And here, it was the thing Daniel had predicted. The crack that wasn't fear, but pride, because Gerald Voss looked at the ruin of 5 years of careful crime, looked at the janitor, and the CEO, and the lawyer, and something in him that could not bear to lose, without being admired for how nearly he'd won, came loose, and his gray face twisted into something ugly and almost proud. I ran that estate, Gerald said, and his voice had dropped all its warmth, gone cold and vicious and small. For 30 years I ran it. Robert built rockets and played with cars, and I made the trains run. I did the work, the real work, the boring work he never wanted to touch, and he paid me like a clerk. 30 years. His hands were shaking. And then he's dying, and he's going to leave every cent to you, and to a fund for other people's children, strangers' children, and not $1 extra for the man who gave him his whole life. So yes, I took what I'd earned. I took what I was owed. And I'd have gotten every penny of it if that senile old fool hadn't built a puzzle box, a child's game, and if he flung a hand at Daniel, some disgraced grease monkey hadn't crawled out from under the car. Gerald, Victoria said softly, stop talking. You think you've won? Gerald's voice cracked. You think a letter from a dead man and a mechanic's story? I think, said Diane, walking into the garage with the detective beside her, that you just confessed to embezzlement, forgery, and tampering on camera with counsel present. And I think you should absolutely keep talking, Mr. Voss, but you have the right not to." Gerald Voss stopped talking. The detective read him his rights in the quiet of the garage, where a Ferrari had sat dead for 5 years, and Gerald Voss, who had held Victoria's hand at her father's memorial and called her sweetheart while he robbed her, was led up the ramp in handcuffs, and he did not look back, and Victoria did not look away until he was gone. Then the garage was quiet, and Victoria Harrington sat down on the folding chair beside her father's car, and she put her face in her hands, and this time when she cried, it was not for the car, and it was not for grief. It was for 5 years of trusting the wrong man because he had credentials and warmth and a good suit, while the truth sat 18 inches from the ignition, waiting for someone who cared enough to listen. It was exactly what her father had warned her about in his letter, in his lock, in his whole careful, loving design. The best isn't the truest. Trust the one who gives you understanding. Daniel didn't say anything. He'd learned 3 years ago that grief doesn't want to be fixed. He just pulled the other folding chair over and sat beside her and let her. And after a while, Marcus came and stood on her other side, and the three of them sat in the quiet with the car that had finally told the truth. That was a Tuesday. The weeks after moved fast. Diane and the detective built the case Robert Harrington had already built for them, and it was airtight because a victim who documents his own robbery from beyond the grave leaves very little room for argument. The stolen money. Most of it was recovered from Gerald's shell accounts and returned to the scholarship fund, and Victoria added to it, matched it, doubled it, because her father's foundation was going to outlive all of them now. Gerald Voss took a plea rather than face a jury who would hear a dead father's letter read aloud, and he went to prison. And he was in the end exactly as forgettable as he'd tried to make Daniel, a man who'd had 30 years of trust and traded it for money and lost everything and was remembered by no one fondly. And Marcus Bell voided every invoice as he'd promised, and then he did something Victoria didn't expect. He called her a week later and asked almost shyly whether the new director of historic vehicle preservation might need someone who knew the sales and provenance side of the business. "I'm good at the part Daniel isn't," Marcus said. "The Modena part. And I find I'd like to spend the rest of my career working next to a man who does the right thing instead of flying in experts who do the expensive one. It might rub off." Victoria hired him. The two of them, the reformed enemy and the resurrected genius, turned out to make an extraordinary team. Because Daniel took the job. He took it 3 days after Gerald was arrested, and he took it for exactly the reason Victoria had known would work, which wasn't the salary, and wasn't the title, and wasn't even the cars. It was Lily. "You asked me what my daughter learns watching me hide," Daniel said the day he accepted. They were standing by the Ferrari, and Lily was there. Victoria had insisted he bring her an 8-year-old with her father's serious eyes, running her hand along Bella's fender with the exact reverence Daniel had. "I've been thinking about it every day since. What she learns." He watched his daughter. "For 3 years I told myself I went invisible to protect her. And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth is, I went invisible because I was ashamed. Because doing the right thing cost me Sarah and my name, and I couldn't stand to keep being the man who paid that price, so I stopped being him. I put him under a uniform, and I pushed a mop, and I let the world forget he existed." His voice roughened. "And I told myself that was for Lily. But a kid doesn't learn courage from a father who's hiding. She learns hiding. And now," Victoria said. Daniel looked at his daughter, and then at the car, and then at Victoria. "Now I want her to grow up knowing her father did the hard right thing, and it cost him everything, and it took years, and it took a dead man's Ferrari, but he got back up." He smiled, and it was the first real, full smile Victoria had ever seen on him, and it took 10 years off his face. "I want her to know the world overlooks good men, and I want her to know it's wrong when it does, and I want her to watch her father stop letting it." He accepted the job right there with his hand on Bella's fender and his daughter beside him. Months later, on a clear, bright morning, Victoria drove the Ferrari for the first time. She'd been afraid to. All this time, afraid to move it, afraid to risk it, afraid that driving it would use up something finite, some last connection to her father that would be gone once she'd spent it. But her father hadn't built her a car to keep in a garage. He'd built her a car to drive to learn to earn, and she finally understood that leaving it silent to preserve it was just a slower way of leaving it broken. So she did the sequence. Hand on the switch. Hello, Bella. The pause her father built, so his daughter would have to stop and wait and talk to him one more time, and she used it every time to say something to him. And that morning what she said was thank you. The key. The roar. Bella came alive under her hands, sure and joyful, and hers. And Victoria pulled out of the garage and into the sun with her father's voice all around her. And Daniel stood in the drive with Lily on his shoulders and watched her go. Dad, Lily said, watching the Ferrari disappear down the long drive, the engine's song hanging in the air behind it. You fixed it. And Daniel Carter, who had lost his wife and his name and 3 years of his life to the hard price of an honest man who had pushed a mop through a rich woman's garage while the world called him nobody, who had walked up to a machine the greatest experts on earth had given up on and simply listened until it told him the truth. Looked at the empty drive where the sound still lived and pulled his daughter's hands tighter around his neck and gave her the truest answer he had. No, sweetheart, he said. I didn't fix it. Nothing was ever broken. He watched the last of the sound fade into the bright morning. I just cared enough to understand it. That's all it ever needed. That's all any of it ever needs. And the man everyone had refused to see spent the rest of his life being seen, doing the work he was born for, raising a daughter who would never learn to hide because he had finally learned from a dead father's letter and a locked machine and the sound of an engine coming back to life that a gift kept hidden helps no one, and the world is changed only by the people brave enough to let themselves be found.